Hey, Troy,
Ask,
am I making you host?
yeah. Ask good questions, guys, because this was a last minute one.
All right. All right. You are host. You know the deal, and
Yep.
we'll see.
So let me spotlight Corey, and then here's Kimmy. Spotlight. All right, we'll give everybody a minute while we're still a minute short too. But we'll give everybody a minute to get in. How's everybody doing today?
Good, thanks.
Oh, look at that. We were already getting questions coming in. And of course, it's Natalie who always asks the best questions. All right, so I guess that's good. It's 1:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Pro Powers. I'll just kind of be running the show and letting these two wonderful people who have agreed to come talk to us kind of share their knowledge, but we'll have them introduce themselves first. So Corey Singleton, why don't you go ahead and get started? Give us a little intro on your background.
Sure, thank you for having me. My name is Corey Singleton, and I manage the Assistive Technology Initiative at George Mason University. We are about 30 minutes or so west of DC. I've been at Mason for close to 15 years now. Prior to that, I worked with the Department for the Blind and Vision Impaired in Fairfax, Virginia for about 8 years. I've been working in assistive technology in some capacity, either within state, local government or within higher ed for close to 25 years now. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining us. Kimmy Zamora, why don't you give us a little intro?
Hi, my name is Kimmy. I'm actually a student here at USC. And part of my involvement here as a student is I've been the co-director of our student assembly for accessibility. That's our disability student assembly here at USC. And I study cybersecurity, so very intertwined with the disability community and technology.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. The panel today is kind of, about assistive technology and kind of the thought or the idea of, what's compliance versus what's inclusion. So kind of, in your own words, what do you think the difference is between compliance and inclusion? Kimmy, what do you think?
Yeah, so compliance to me, when I think of compliance, I think of like lawful standards, what is written in the book. When I think of compliance, obviously there's more of a legality background. I do think of ADA, I think of HIPAA for running my meetings and using technologies and helping people with disabilities alike. I always respect people's privacy. However, I want to provide the most inclusive experience that I can without invading their privacy. Now, that's on the lawful side. On the inclusive side, here, what I've seen at USC has really evolved over the years. When I first attended USC, I noticed that everything was by the book, very lawful. But since being involved in ITS here, things have really evolved. Now, I really think that our IT department goes above and beyond and really starts thinking of accessibility right at the planning stage. Yeah.
And Corey, what about you?
Can you repeat the question? I got the compliance part, compliance versus
Inclusion. So,
inclusion.
the idea.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, no, I understand. So when I think of compliance, I'm gonna kind of piggyback off of what Kimmy was saying, but I also think of it as kind of baseline. So in some ways, institutions say, what's the minimum I can do to avoid being sued? And unfortunately, one of the roles we don't necessarily talk about at our institution is that we have just as much as a of an accommodation kind of role as we do a risk management kind of role. So we don't want the institution to get sued. So that's kind of where we are standing in the gap in a lot of ways. And so when you think about compliance and the whole legal aspect of it is, what does the law say, and what do we need to do exactly to ensure that we don't get sued, that kind of part. But similar to what Kimmy was saying, we do go above and beyond to try and support our students as much as possible. You will hear a lot of discussions around universal design for learning and inclusion in the classroom, and more times than not, what that means is trying to provide the student with what they need before they are asking for it. So what we would like is that students don't necessarily have to ask for everything. They have exactly everything they need when they show up. And it's just in time. It's not something that has to be asked for on day one and then provided on day 7 because you need time to reach out to vendors and all that kind of stuff. So compliance is, what do we do to avoid being sued? And then inclusion is, what can we do to ensure equivalent access? What can we do to ensure people have access when they show up to actually take classes, participate in events, work, anything like that.
Oh, great. So how is it, and this is a trouble we all have, right, with budgets and things we deal with. How do you go about kind of with that conversation with management, avoiding the minimum and kind of pushing towards that inclusivity rather than just the bare minimum, like you said? Because in my opinion, I think you're spot on. Compliance is that bare minimum standard that we have to meet.
So I'll jump out and basically say that Mason has been great about providing resources, not only in terms of money, but in terms of staffing to try and support equivalent access across the campus. The challenge sometimes is getting administration to think about it from a more proactive standpoint than just the compliance side of things. That's usually where the challenge lies. What we've tried to do, our mission at least, in order to try and get buy-in on our campus, because what you'll find with many higher education institutions is that those who are complying, doing a great job complying right now, oftentimes have been driven by a lawsuit. So a lawsuit happened. They ended up having to change things like a learning management system, kiosks, all that kind of stuff. Office of Civil Rights came in and looked at everything, and therefore they realized, all right, they were required to provide staffing. They were required to spend money on new technologies and new training and things like that. And so what we've tried to do in order to get buy-in on our campus, because every campus culture is a little different, we ended up we looked at the lawsuits, and what you'll find if you look at the lawsuits is that those students who are most likely to be impacted by technology access related issues are students who are blind, low vision, deaf, or hard of hearing. And so that's who's driven the lawsuits. And so on our campus, we started looking at where are our students who are blind, low vision, deaf, or hard of hearing taking classes? What are they most likely to struggle with or need access to? And then we started looking at documents. We started looking at videos. We started looking at ways to get faculty members who are going to directly impact that individual's academic experience to ensure that those resources are accessible as possible. We looked at the technologies that they would need in the classroom, like amplification tools, like screen reading applications and screen magnification tools and other things like that a student might request if they were coming to school to take classes, to ensure we had those tools in place and to ensure we had those supports in place for whatever courses they were taking. And then we built those services to be scalable. So it wouldn't matter if one faculty member showed up asking for 5 videos or 50 showed up asking for 500 videos. The service was scalable enough. The budget was scalable enough to accommodate all of those things. And it wouldn't matter, the turnaround time is still 3 days, no matter if it's 5 requests or 500 requests. So we looked at things like that to try and think, what's a service we could provide to meet faculty members in the middle? Because oftentimes they want to provide support, but they just don't know how to. And they don't necessarily have the resources on their own. And so those are things we ended up advocating to administration for, trying to get support for, and then kind of building out those services and those strategies at Mason to make it a little easier to comply.
Nice. And stemming off what you said, I really think that it starts with inquiring about the students' needs. I have been running an organization for students with disabilities for about 3.5 years. And some of the students that we have here at USC have invisible and visible disabilities. And so with a wide range of disability, it's really hard to account for everyone with one single solution. And I think that's where, even with this much experience and, you know, being physically disabled myself, I still today cannot call myself an expert on disability. And it's really important that we work with administration, or we need to have the bridge between administration and student experience. So that's where my organization comes into place. We hold weekly meetings to have real live talks about what experiences students with disabilities are having today. I myself express them through undergraduate student government to administration. And because I also work for IT, I'm able to address those issues directly. So just having this live open platform for students to voice their experiences, even when we're planning new projects, has been revolutionary in terms of the long term, in my opinion.
So, you know, I have these prepared questions, but we're getting so many from the chat. And I think Mike's just asked one that kind of follows along with these funding requests when we're asking for, you know, stronger technology in terms of, you know, seeking inclusivity. So how do you successfully request the additional funding needed to maximize your ability to add and upgrade systems to be more accessible? And I guess, you know, following along that, Kimmy, like, how do you kind of advocate for that funding in your student organization? So kind of going at that both ways. Kimmy, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, so it took funding for our organization. It's not immediate. So we have to advocate for that allocation. And it's not, like I said, it's not immediate, it's not a next day thing. So we have to have data in order to back up what we need / want in terms of accessibility. And to get the importance to higher management, we also need to report cases and really express to them that this is a risk and a liability, and there is the risk of losing more money in lawsuits than solving the solution, like solving the problem before it becomes a problem. So that's usually my takeaway when asking for funding, because there is risk, there is ADA compliance. This should be the bare minimum. But if you're advocating for something more, say, hey, this doesn't cost too much, it's marginal utility in terms of cost, this would be great for our university to be ahead of the others in terms of assistive technologies.
And I agree with a lot of what Kimmy was saying. One of the things I'll add is that we pilot a lot of things. So it's okay to start small and kind of create a little, you know, give them something that they can see in practice. It's a little better to understand than to kind of have an abstract kind of project that you kind of pull together. So I'll give you an example. About 10 years or so, actually about 11 years ago or so, we started our captioning process here on campus. And originally what that looked like was we had 2 graduate students and a couple of staff members in my office who were essentially taking requests from our instructional designers who were working with faculty members who needed videos captioned. And we also had any classes where we had some deaf and hard of hearing students taking classes. And so through that process, which basically lasted over about a year or two, and I'll say this, prior to that, we had, this is prior to a lot of the AI generated kind of captioning solutions that you see right now. There was one out there that was called DocSoft, which was pretty good. It was as good as YouTube was, you know, 10, 11 years ago. And so one of the things you found is that there were still a lot of issues and errors, and it was a server-based solution, which if you uploaded your videos, it would transcribe them, then you would go and clean up the transcript and then provide that. Well, we had a lot of different issues that were going on our campus, a lot of these decentralized projects. So at that time, we were using media servers. And so you had a Flash media server, you had a Windows media server, you had these different media servers that were used more for storage and not so much for streaming media. And so there were a lot of little things that were kind of an issue with the process of rolling out some kind of campus-wide captioning process. But we focused on where the need was, right? And the need was, we have deaf and hard of hearing students who are taking classes right now. This is how much money we would have to spend to outsource this. This is how much we think we can do it if we bring it in-house. And so we started with that little discussion. Nobody wanted to take it on. My office said we'd be willing to, and they said, okay, we'll give you $20,000. Let's see how, let's see how it goes, essentially. And that's basically where we started. And then we got it to a point where the university said, all right, we're going to ongoing give you $25,000 a year. And if it goes over 25,000, we're going to backstop that with central funds. And so that's basically how the process built was started. And so we refined that over the years. We used YouTube originally. We went from YouTube to using Kaltura because we were able to kind of piggyback off of some things that our learning support services folks were doing. So part of it was changing us in the university. Part of it was us using our own data to try and refine processes and refine systems. And then it got to a point where, it was funny because COVID happens, everything shuts down, but we have this process in place where we had already been processing about 1,500 to 2,000 videos a year already. COVID happens, it jumps to 4,500. It's not a blip in the radar because we've been doing it for a while. But we started with that little incubator process. And then we did the same thing. We modeled our document remediation process in the same way. And we started in 2018 with that. We didn't ask for any funding. We just started doing it as a part of our extra duties in the office. And we focused on where the need was. We looked at our blind low vision students because that's what we were doing anyway. And we said, let's start a process and kind of build from there. And then we were kind of able to make arguments about money where it was more focused on staffing, because I was able to show, if we outsource this, we're going to spend at the very least $5 per page. And that's a basic page. But add any kind of math to it, any complex tables or anything like that, it jumps to $10+ a page. I can do this in-house for $1.50 a page based on our staffing, if you give me a salary that allows me to bring this individual up to blah, blah, blah. And so those are the kinds of things we started with. Little pilot projects really helped out quite a bit. And again, we focused on starting at the need. And then once we were able to address the need, we went more globally and said, let's look at classes that are being, online courses that are being developed, online programs that are being fully developed. And then we'll leave it open for anybody else who makes a request. And so again, building some processes that you can put in place quickly to address the need, but also that are scalable has helped us quite a bit. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
No, that was great. So, early on in your answer there, you mentioned AI captioning software. There's plenty of those. Zoom does it, PowerPoint does it. There's plenty of standalone softwares. How has that kind of changed? How you support hard of hearing students? Are you still doing it in the same ways? Your FM systems and other loops, induction loops and things, or are you moving towards AI assisted captioning, or even like a cart system with a live caption system?
So we have a few different things in place. There are some students who are using cart, but we prefer human transcription. The AI is still not quite there, and it depends on the classes, it depends on the speaker, it depends on the microphones you have in place. So it's a nice to have, but it's more of something to fill in gaps when you don't have access to human transcription. So I don't know if there's an area that's looped on campus at this point in time. We do have amplification systems. Our folks have done a great job in putting in some amplification systems in a number of different classrooms across campus. It used to only be in like a few different places, and we provided some amplification systems that we work with Troy, who's on this in this session, to kind of get in place and to manage for our students who would check them in and out of classrooms. But our classroom support folks have done an excellent job of kind of building out more inclusive access in a number of classrooms across campus. It's not in every classroom, but it's in a lot more places than it was, say, 10 years ago. The AI part of things, we kind of ask people to use that when, say, there's no request. You set up an event, but nobody really requests accommodations, then turn on the AI captions for those who may not. requested, or they may have been too late to the party to kind of request it. But if you give someone access, more times than not, we prefer they have access to human transcription. I will add one piece for the captioning process that we have in place. Some of the vendors that we outsource to use AI to get the transcript, and then they will actually come in with human intervention to clean it up. That has changed quite a bit over years. It used to be you were either doing human or you were getting AI, and now it's a little bit of both in order to create a better transcript. So some vendors have changed their processes in that way.
Kimmy, do you have you had any experience with AI captioning or anything like that with your organization?
Not necessarily AI captioning besides the typical, well, just to backtrack a little, each and every single one of our classrooms is Zoom integrated. So we're actually able to host live Zoom sessions, and there we use the automated like pre-captioning service when it's short term. However, if somebody does like pre-request, we do have the ability to invite a virtual cart service. And through that, they'll be able to like live type captions for us. To request such, our organization does have something called an accessibility budget allocated. It's about, I think right now it's 30,000 that our undergraduate student government pushed for just for accommodation use. So I know that's not necessarily directly IT related, but just having a budget on the side for accommodations is what we have.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. So get back to some of our more normal questions that we came up with here at the start. So we've talked about how deaf and hard of hearing is kind of where you've seen the biggest need in terms of for these kind of accommodations. That being said, what kind of specific technologies are you using to kind of support not just our deaf and hard of hearing students, but any students in the learning process? Corey, why don't you start us off?
Sure, not a problem. So we have a number of tools that we purchased that I'd say the largest number of students who typically come are referred to our office from disability services are students with some type of learning or cognitive impairment. So we have tools like Snap and Read and Write, which are campus-wide licenses that students can take advantage of. We have Blackboard Ally built into the learning management system. Blackboard Ally is a accessibility tool. Essentially, it helps faculty members or instructors to identify where they may have accessibility related issues as it relates to any images or documents that they have uploaded to their course, or any content that they might have, text content that they might have uploaded to their course. From the student side, they can download those documents or any of that text content into a format of their choosing. So they can choose to download it as an audio file, or an HTML file, or an EPUB, or a tagged PDF, or something like that. So it really it empowers any student to really be able to take advantage of the formats that work best for them in terms of their own learning styles. When we initially rolled that out, we didn't do any advertisement for it from the student side. We did from the faculty side. And in the first year, we had over 60,000 unique downloads across roughly about 5,000, 6,000 classes or so. And in the second year, it's jumped over 1,000 unique downloads. And again, this is across the board. This is across thousands of classes, 5,000 plus classes. And a lot of these students are not coming to our office to request this kind of thing. This is something they're just kind of organically taking advantage of. So it's been a really, really useful service for us to have.
Yeah, stemming off that, here we have assistive hearing devices in every room where students and faculty can use. If they need anything specific, they would have to like go to the disability center. However, in terms of hard of hearing folks, we did use our hybrid Zoom classroom functionality for my weekly meetings, and we were able to invite a virtual ASL interpreter to live transcribe every single meeting. And it was a combination of a live ASL interpreting. It was a combination of cart captioning at the same time. It just made everything very, very accessible to every student. If you don't know what these hybrid spaces are, essentially, they're a regular classroom with a physical space, and we have a computer, a Crestron system in our classroom, and is integrated with the classroom itself. There's a camera and a microphone, so we're able to not only stream our physical classroom on Zoom and interact with the people in person, but we can also hear, and they can hear us online, and we can see whoever joins.
Now, if I can add one point to a lot of this, what has been really useful is we also have a staff member in my office who sits on what's called the Architecture Standards Review Board, which is a part of our Information Technology Services Group. And they review all incoming IT purchases. And our accessibility person that sits on there is able to talk with the vendors when we are in the process of considering purchasing these solutions. So we can ask really hard questions. Do you have a VPAT? Are you addressing things around accessibility? And being able to address those things before we purchase or implement or write out a contract or anything like that has been really, really helpful in terms of mitigating a lot of the bigger issues. Now, do we have the power to stop anybody? No. But what we can do is identify where there are some accessibility related gaps. And so in those gaps, we can then go back to the person who's making the purchase on the campus and say, hey, you're purchasing this. It's going to be in place and impact, say, 1,000+ students going through XYZ program. But it does not support access for these types of students or these types of individuals. What are you going to do to support them should this come through? And so what it does is it gets the people on campus thinking a little bit more about the solutions that they purchase. It gets us kind of putting in place what we call equally effective alternative access plan before we put the solution in place. So the market is set up in such a way that not every company is dealing with accessibility, but a number of the bigger ones are starting to deal with things around accessibility because more institutions are asking those questions. And if you can at least identify where there are gaps for things you're going to put in place, then you can come up with plans to kind of work out some of those challenges too. And so I'll give you examples. Our institution years ago was kind of fighting the battle between Google and Microsoft. And so we made a hard push for Microsoft because at the time, Microsoft was a much more accessible product, still is in a lot of ways. And, we got Microsoft in place. And so if you look at Microsoft 365 just across the campus and a lot of the accessibility that's built into all those different solutions, that means students can show up and access whatever they need to. Is it perfect all the time? No, but it really supports a lot of different students with a lot of the tools that are built in. And same, Kimmy had mentioned Zoom. So Zoom has the transcription automatically built in. Microsoft Teams has the transcription automatically built in. Teams is what we use for a lot of our smaller group meetings, for a lot of committee meetings, things like that. And so you'll use Zoom for kind of bigger sessions like this. And so having a lot of those pieces in place really does address a lot of the accessibility issues up front.
Yeah, and just to stem off you, I think something that really complements before making big purchases is user interface testing. I've had students in ITS come into my own organization and ask students if they wanted to voluntarily test some products before they launch university-wide. So yeah, I think really being involved with students and getting their feedback before big decisions are made are really effective.
So just really quick, Corey, you mentioned a VPAT, and we had a question earlier about VPATs, and are they required on your university? Kimmy, I'm not sure if this is something you would be aware of, but is that something you require, or is that something you look for from your vendors?
That is a very interesting question, Troy. So, all right. So yes, do we require, meaning do we ask for it all the time? Yes. Do the vendors have to provide it? I guess it just depends on how much the person paying for it was really willing to listen to what we were saying. So if the CIO, who pretty much has the final say on anything that comes out of ASRB, decides we're getting this tool, we may not find out about it until after it's purchased and it's about to be implemented. So it really depends. But yes, our accessibility person, that is one of the first things we ask for. The reason is that you can tell really quickly if the company's thought about accessibility. If they don't have a VPAT, 9 times out of 10, the product's not accessible. If they do have a VPAT, then you can at least look at a few things in the VPAT and measure that against your own testing to see if it's just a salesperson filling that VPAT out, or if they actually had this tested by accessibility people that are on their staff, or they sent it out to a third party. So I think is it the end all be all? No, but it's a critical piece of information to be able to measure the level of accessibility of a product before you actually purchase it.
All right, so or you mentioned that some of the accommodations that you've come out with are more available to all of your students, and you're seeing them accessed by a lot of your students. And you also mentioned that you work with the accommodations office, the disability office, and that's how you get most of your recommendations for people who you assist with technology. How do we kind of bring those numbers closer together, the people seeking accommodations versus the people who actually need accommodations? Because it seems like those, there's a gap there. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, there's always a gap. If you look at the research in most higher education institutions, what they estimate is roughly about 19% of students, or there are 19% of the student body are students with disabilities. Oftentimes what you'll see as far as registering in the disability office is probably closer to 5%. It may be a little bit more at some institutions, maybe a little bit less at others. But I think what we find is that we've done a lot of things to try and beef up that number a little bit. And what you'll find is that more times than not, students just want to take classes and get through. Not everybody wants to disclose that they have a disability. Not everybody even thinks of themselves as having a disability or having any kind of specific needs. And so for that reason, they may choose not to disclose, or even if they do disclose, they may choose not to ever take advantage of the accommodations that are available to them. And I think the biggest thing that we can do are things that Kimmy and I've been sitting here talking about, which is to try and be as inclusive as possible in the technology solutions that we put in place on campus. Because you have a lot of folks who will take advantage of things, even though they don't think they have a disability or a specific need that requires that they ask for accommodation. People just want to show up and use the resources when they need them. They don't want to always have to go through sitting down, talking to a counselor, going through medical documentation, determining what I'm approved for, and then going and actually providing or disclosing that information to a faculty member or every faculty member they're taking classes with. So, students with disabilities are students first. And, they really just want to take classes and graduate just like every other student. So it's kind of the thing, they don't want to always fight the battle for accommodations.
Actually, can I stem off this question? So we found this a problem at our campus about 3.5 years ago, and that's why my organization was founded, because of the primary discrepancy between students who are actually identified as disabled versus the registration in the disability office. So what we found a big part of it by surveying our students was that one of the biggest discrepancies was unfortunately campus culture and the outlook overall upon disability. So what my organization, in contrast to our campus's disability office, is that we created a safe space for students with disabilities to talk about their experience. And our whole goal was to normalize and provide a safe platform to talk about disability and our experiences, including technologies, not only technologies, but campus infrastructure, to talk about and hear about what we're experiencing, what other peers are experiencing. And from that, I take that information and address it with IT and upper administration. So I feel like that really links the gap for us.
Yeah, that's great. So have you noticed, since you've kind of taken these steps, since your organization's been around for 3.5 years, Kimmy and Corey, since you've been taking these steps with assistive technology, Is there an uptick in enrollment? Do you see more students with disabilities enrolling in the school? Is it kind of if you build it, they will come kind of situation? Corey, why don't you get us started?
Sure. Yeah, our numbers have grown quite a bit over the years. Part of that, I think, is natural growth and enrollment at the institution. And part of that are the services that are being offered by disability services. And I'll give you an example. One example is they have what they call the Mason Autism Spectrum Initiative, which they started a few years ago. And that specifically is targeted towards students on the spectrum who may need additional supports. And that's been very well received. It was piloted probably 7-8 years ago, and has grown considerably over the years. So I think when disability services and other institutions, or other units rather, on campus build out programs that may specifically reach out to certain populations that may need additional needs, you may always get, you can get more support in that way. And so we found that there's also another program or another student organization on our campus called Visually Impaired Patriots. And that was for those students, again, a student-run organization that started probably about 6 or 7 years ago, about the same. And they wanted to get together specifically for students with visual impairments, kind of discuss some of the challenges that they were having on campus. For those institutions that may have the robots from, what was it, I think Starship Technologies. So we have the robots driving around campus delivering food and everything, all the different buildings on campus. And we had an issue early on where there were some accessibility related challenges with the robots. And we worked specifically with the Visually Impaired Patriots group to address that, not only with the upper administration, but also specifically with the CEO and his team over at Starship Technologies to fix some issues there. And that was a really successful program. So like Kimmy's referenced several times, working directly with the student units has been really good. And I think in terms of beefing up enrollment, that kind of helps work with word of mouth too. And I'll speak specifically about the blind low vision community. In my experience working with them over the years, there's a lot of word of mouth. So it's a very tight-knit community. They talk a lot about technologies and resources and all kinds of programs and things like that. And so sharing those resources, sharing those experiences has been beneficial, because we tend to keep, more so than most institutions, more so I would say than maybe, more so than almost every other institution in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we tend to have more blind and low vision students at Mason than there are in any other institution. And part of that is proximity to DC, and part of that is just the nature of, I think, the services that we have in place to support those populations. So those are just some examples.
Have you noticed something similar, Kimmy, with an uptick in attendance?
Yeah, so the struggle with founding my organization is that it started on a battle against administration, because they proposed that there is no student demand, and my organization was never going to get off its feet because they didn't believe that students with disabilities wanted a community. However, we pushed for otherwise. We gave the statistic that about, once again, 1 in 5 students is considered to have a disability. And we started talking around. We were wondering why. Why is that so? Because if we understand why, then we understand what the issue is. So once again, we found that the biggest problem was the stigma on our campus culture. I mean, it just makes sense. If you're a student and you're with your group of friends and you have an invisible disability, and let's say you're at the club rush, you're not going to go by yourself independently to stand in front of the disabilities booth in front of all your friends. There's a stigma around it, unfortunately, a negative stigma. So what we created this safe space. We turned it disability identity into a student assembly. So now there's a safe space. If you want to meet other people with disabilities, you could come and talk freely and listen to other students who are experiencing the same thing or something different. But that alone, now we have a community who we're able to talk about our challenges with the disability office, to talk about our challenges with technology. And if somebody needs help with registering because of accessibility barriers, ironically, within the disability office, we're able to help one another out and address those, because disability is very individualized. And once again, it's like nearly impossible to address everybody's experiences. So that's what we found with our enrollment numbers. And now I believe our organization over the past 3 years accumulates a sum from 0 to about 300 in and out members, which I think is pretty good for destigmatizing the negative stigmas about disability.
Absolutely. So I mean, you both kind of touched on that stigma that you know, folks with disabilities kind of have to deal with. So I'm sure that's most difficult, you know, kind of in a transition period, moving into higher education, you know, from kind of you know, K through 12, right? What are kind of some best practices that you've kind of seen to improve that transition and make that transition kind of seamless? Kimmy, what are your thoughts?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question really quick?
So what are some ways that you've found to make it easier for incoming students with disabilities to kind of transition to higher ed, to college life?
Most definitely. So what I did is we compiled through our own experiences and an all-in-one guide for student accessibility at USC. So we included USC available resources such as websites, links, short descriptions for the disability office, all the associated clubs here at USC, like Trojans for Neurodiversity, different other support groups. We included our student health center, contact information for assistive devices, and at the very bottom of the page, we have external resources. For example, if they run into a legal issue, we give them the contact information for the disability law office here at downtown LA. And of course, we always address that we have meetings every single week. As a constant open source, we have a student Discord as a live chat. It creates a sense of community. I really think that community is really important. Community is really key to supporting one another. If we didn't have the support, there would be really no guidance. It's all up to the students to voice our concerns, and we need to let our students know, hey, if you have a problem, please let us know. Because according to HETMA, like, we can't ask them. We can only say, hey, if you have a problem, let us know. We're here to help everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty great. We don't have at Mason, unfortunately, we don't have as many student organizations doing things like Kimmy's group. That's pretty amazing. And we would like to see more kind of grassroots organizations. What we've found over the years is that you'll see things that kind of start like that, a spark starts, and then you lose the person who started that spark, and then kind of the organization falls by the wayside as a result. So we are actually trying to work with some students to help build somewhat of an infrastructure with a little more staff intervention, faculty intervention in the beginning, just to kind of help them get started, or at least to help them stay afloat. Because what we found is, you know, once you lose the leadership, you kind of lose the organization, and that's where things have fallen apart. Some things that we've tried to do, we work closely with disability services to create resources similar to a lot of what Kimmy's talking about. So when students who are registering with disability services come through, they usually receive kind of a suite of resources that include a lot of different things that Kimmy was mentioning. We've worked with faculty and staff to include language on syllabi that basically point students towards a lot of these different resources. Maybe the Math Tutoring Center, it could be the Writing Center, it could be Disability Services. Just to say, hey, if you're having some challenges, these are some resources you might consider. We don't want faculty members calling students with disabilities out or pointing out anyone, but we do want them to say, you know, hey, here's some resources that, you know, you might want to take advantage of, and this is for every student to kind of take advantage of those. From a technology standpoint, we point them towards things like Blackboard Ally, so they're aware of what it is and what it can do. They're made aware of tools like Read and Write. They're made aware of tools like those who may have more specific needs, like screen readers or screen magnification tools or things like that. So we try to do things, whether it's through orientation workshops, whether it's been through summer transition workshops. We will go around and do workshops to the local public schools. We tend to get a fair number of students with disabilities who attend the local public schools or the local community college transitioning to Mason. Mason is it's called the Advanced Program, and it's a partnership with Northern Virginia Community College. So students can be dual enrolled both at Northern Virginia Community College and at Mason taking classes. And so the students who are NOVA students can always come to Mason's campus and take advantage of those resources as well. And that's involved us partnering and having some discussions with Northern Virginia Community College around some of these things too. And so there are a lot of little things here. I would say we probably don't have anything as comprehensive as what Kimmy has in place though.
Yeah, it sounds really great what you guys have done there at USC with this student group. Where am I at here? So both USC and Mason are fairly large schools. One is private with a pretty large endowment, and one is a state school that's relatively young. Like, how do those kind of differences kind of affect the way that you kind of accommodate students, or look to kind of, or is there a difference in the way you approach it based on that at all? Corey, why don't you give us your thoughts?
You know, I would say because we are governed by essentially Title II of the ADA, and when you look at the lawsuits, that's we tend to follow what has happened as it relates to a lot of those legal settlements that are out there, because typically higher education institutions, specifically public institutions, have to follow a lot of those legal settlements that have happened under Title II. Is there a difference in practice? I would say probably not. I think the digital accessibility community in higher education is fairly, while large, it's fairly small, really. And so if I go to a few conferences a year, I see a lot of those people. We have a lot of the same discussions. There tend to be some best practices around how we handle captioning, how we handle document accessibility, how we handle assistive technology, or the implementation of assistive technology in higher education in a lot of ways. So I think in practice, it will look the same, whether it's a private institution, a 2-year institution, 4-year institution. In practice, we are doing a lot of the same things. The challenge is, what is the culture at your institution? And so at Mason, it's been a very supportive culture for a number of years, even predating me, as far as trying to be as inclusive as possible for individuals with disabilities. And the way that's been addressed has changed somewhat over time, but Mason has always generally tried to be a very inclusive campus in a lot of different ways. I can talk to a colleague, it could be UVA or Virginia Tech or ODU or some Old Dominion, you know, something like that, and we may have very different ways to try and accomplish the same goal. And that's because this is the route I can navigate through Mason. This is the route they can navigate through ODU or through Mary Washington or whatever. Or you may be in a situation where I have a separate office, an assistive technology initiative office, which is, you know, I have 4 staff members, including myself, or 5 staff members, including myself, and 2 student workers dedicated towards digital accessibility. I can go just down the road. Mary Washington has 1 person. And so that 1 person has to figure out captioning. They have to figure out web accessibility. They have to figure out accommodation requests for students. They have to figure out accommodation requests for faculty staff as well. Whereas I can, you know, divvy those responsibilities up amongst roughly 5 people and have 2 support students to kind of help with that initiative. So I think what you'll find is culturally, it's a little different on every campus, and in practice, it's a little different depending on staffing. But I think what we want to do, or what we're trying to accomplish, is pretty much the same.
Yeah, most definitely. And I'm gonna just put a disclaimer, I'm not in the financial part. I'm a student worker here at USC. However, I can talk about the accommodation process and budget requests and how money affects USG, because USC's USG does have a pretty big budget. For all our student government, I believe our total endowment, or like total available for allocation, is over $2 million. However, because we're such a new organization and our problem hasn't really been highlighted, our budget is like really, really small compared to that. We essentially have to keep interjecting for money. This is obviously very different from the IT side, because with IT side, they always ask for my opinion. They ask for student volunteers to do UI testing on any of the new features and planning that they're doing to address the problems before they arise. But yeah, in terms of our USG budget allocation, we petitioned for something called an accessibility budget, which I referenced before, but we took 1 year's cost for my individual organization. We proposed how much it would be cost for like an ASL interpreter, cart services, like renting out accessible facilities, accessible equipment, accommodations, how to accommodate everything. We listed an itemized spreadsheet for 1 unit, and we multiplied that over the entire year. And that was how much we were able to petition for. Of course, there was negotiations back and forth, but as soon as our budget allocation was set, that was already money put aside for us to use specifically for accessibility. Of course, itemized things will fluctuate throughout the year about things that come over cost, under cost, but I feel like at least if there's some money set aside, it always comes down to thinking ahead, even putting precautionary money when you need an immediate solution now will help whoever is in need when the time comes. You never know who's going to come through that door. And I think that's just a mindset that I always have. For every single meeting that we have, I always have an ASL interpreter or CART services in place, because it's students with disabilities. You never know. You want to make it accessible, want it to be a worry-free zone for the student, worry-free zone for yourself, cover all your checks. You don't need to worry about it.
Excellent, thank you. So what are some of the gaps in the existing technology services and support services that you currently offer to students? What are some of the current gaps in the existing assistive technology supports and services being offered to students with disabilities to prepare for and go through higher education? Think larger, because I know Mason in particular, and I know USC has a few older classrooms. So take into account problems with physical structures, and ADA issues that come in with old buildings that don't have doorways wide enough or don't have the ability to turn a wheelchair around. So where do those gaps exist, and kind of what can we do to look towards closing them? Kimmy, what do you think?
Yeah, as a student myself who have dangers in and out of old buildings, I would say I definitely ran into a few inaccessibility issues myself. You can't really see like through Zoom, but I am a power wheelchair user, and some of the older buildings aren't necessarily accessible, even though they seem to be. So yes, we do have buildings without elevators. We have buildings, ironically, I had a classroom in one of the basements where they had an elevator, but as soon as I went down the elevator, there was a step, A+. But how did I get around? Well, the only thing I could really do was contact the disability office, really express and know my rights. It's very, very important for students to know their rights. I knew when going into university from my high school teacher that if an able-bodied student without a disability could do it by law, I should be able to do it as well. That includes registering for every single class. Any class that I registered for should be accessible. I expect infrastructure completely accessible. If I need it on my accommodation letter, I will put accessible furniture. I will make sure that it is on there for me to learn. I need to advocate for myself because there are some students who are pressured by higher administration and led to believe that they're in the wrong and just have to deal with the inaccessibility issues. And unfortunately, I've seen some friends drop out of university because of accessibility issues. And we want to eliminate that to the best of our abilities. Like, it's so tragic to get into a really high university and drop out because you can't physically keep up. So I'm sorry, I went on a tangent. What was the question?
You were perfect, honestly. Just discussing kind of the gaps that exist in technology and access, to higher education right now.
Yeah. But yeah, we report everything like to this disability center. If the disability center does not aid in technology, then that's what my organization's for, because we're like communal, whether it's ADA compliant or not. If you need it, we will make sure you get it. And if it's something that USC legally cannot provide, for example, there may be technological assistive machines that are more of a liability because they have to do with like physical body movements. And we direct them to outside sourcing. We try to aid students in funding and finding that funding in LA. There is money out there. It's just a matter of finding it. Yeah, but I think a lot of it comes from outside sourcing. The university itself has its hands tied in terms of legality and how far their scope is. So, yeah.
I'll piggyback off of some of that. The older buildings are usually a fairly big challenge, especially when it comes to students who may have some kinds of mobility challenges, maybe powered wheelchair users. And so for that reason, what I will say is Mason has spent a fair amount of money in recent years upgrading the buildings and infrastructure and a lot of that. And all of those accessibility related considerations have been included in the building process. And so also, as they've upgraded classrooms and made changes to instructor stations and things like that, again, there were a lot of discussions and a lot of strong considerations about accessibility in the building of a lot of those things too. So I think Mason's done a pretty good job with that. The older buildings are always going to be a challenge. Sometimes you'll find for example, one of our buildings, I think when you go in the building, there's 2 floors. Well, there's the main floor and then there's the basement. Well, no, I'm sorry, it's 3 floors. So you got 2 floors and then the basement, but the bathroom's in the basement. And so it's really difficult sometimes for power wheelchair users, especially if there's anything going on with the elevator, to be able to get down to the basement area. And so having to address those kinds of things has always been fairly challenging. One thing that we are kind of running into now as it relates to students with students who are deaf or hard of hearing is that we have some of the hard of hearing students coming through who need amplification but can't use the old FM solutions that we have, where you may use a neck loop. The hearing aids are changing, and the hearing aid technology is changing as such that those Bluetooth protocols allow them to communicate directly with their smartphones. And then they have microphones that the hearing aids can connect directly to as well, whether it be whatever Bluetooth protocol it is, or if they're using some type of little universal receiver. Those universal receivers are like $700-800 a pop. And sometimes they differ from one hearing aid brand to the other. So is it the institution's responsibility to pay for that? Is it the student's responsibility to pay for that? Students should be paying for that because we don't want to provide, and we're not tasked with actually or responsible for buying these kinds of personal aids. Well, sometimes you find yourself in the middle of these battles trying to help a student get access to what they need, but also realizing that we kind of got to figure out, do we need to upgrade with the technology? Because a lot of those old amplification devices, those are $1,200 a pop. And so when you start thinking about, are we going to shelve all of the, these 7 units we have that are no longer usable, just to start investing in some of this new technology? So we're now in that kind of battle with that discussion. But again, it's a small population, so it's not like we're addressing that need for 1,000 students. We're really only talking about anywhere in the range of 10 to 15, but it's still a fairly significant cost to deal with those kinds of things. So I would think the biggest challenges on our campus as it relates to technology have more to do with physical access, and making sure that those things that you continue to maintain and address those things. And one project that we're working on now, we had reached out to, or we had some conversations with the SGA about walking. Right now they walk the campus to kind of, check buildings, check bathrooms, and make sure things are working, and they report that information back to facilities. We also talked about them maybe volunteering to help out with checking websites, to kind of do audits. We would train them on how to audit websites for accessibility, to kind of help with checking, making sure links are not broken, making sure, text is fine. Not everybody has access to a site improve. Like we have DubBot, which is our web governance solution that includes accessibility. Some other institutions may have site improve or something like that. But we still like manual checkers to kind of go through, not just relying on automated solutions. And so projects like that can really kind of help with adding some human intervention to addressing whether or not there are still gaps out there.
All right, great. So we're getting close to the end here. I do have one question that came in, and I'm not familiar with this. I'm not sure if either of you will be or not, but how effective is HED.org in advocating the need for technology to support students with disabilities? Are you familiar with HED.org?
Yeah, AHEAD is the Association of Higher Education and Disability. We're part of that group. AHEAD tends to be more of a conglomeration of disability services providers. So they are more kind of focused on the disability accommodation side of things. When you register for disability services, you're usually meeting with disability services counselors, things like that. Those groups tend to be connected with AHEAD. Some of them are dealing with technology because they have to. They don't necessarily always have technology people on staff. The group that deals with technology accessibility in higher education is called ATHEN, or the Assistive Technology Higher Education Network, I think is what it's called. But ATHEN is now kind of a part of AHEAD, so those discussions are happening, but a lot of those groups in disability services can talk about it at a high level, but not necessarily understand all the nuances all the time.
All right, so I think Manav, that answers your question about AV managers being a part of that, because I as an AV manager wasn't aware of it, but we'll definitely make an effort now. All right, so we're at our time, but I'd like to go ahead and give both of you a chance to kind of give us some closing thoughts. So Kimmy, kind of what are your closing thoughts on the subject?
I really think accessibility starts at the planning phase, and I really think it's important for IT to really be involved in not only the students directly and their experiences, but also upper management and of course the disability office. I think to address the concern of disability and accessibility, all three need to work together. And honestly, that's kind of the only real way I've found solutions, is to involve everyone.
And I will piggyback off of that statement and pretty much say yes. Our unit is not under IT. We're under the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office, and it involves a lot of shaking hands and kissing babies to try to advance the mission. So it's really important to continue having these discussions. What I will add too, though, is that one of the biggest ways you can make an impact is reviewing technology before it's purchased and implemented. So, but once it's implemented, you got to try and find fixes around it. But if you can review it during the purchasing process, have those discussions with the vendor, it will save you a lot of headaches in the long run.
All right, well, thank you both so much for joining us. I think this was a great discussion. I don't know if you want to maybe drop contact information. And Kimmy, I don't want to put you out. You're a student, so but if you feel like it, you can put your contact information in the chat in case anybody has any follow-up questions for you. And other than that, I'll go ahead and give you a minute, and then I'll close out. I'll go ahead and close out this this session.
Thank you guys for having me. Kimmy, it was great to meet you and to hear your experience over at USC. And Troy, it's good to see you again. Sorry we lost you.
Yeah,
I'm glad NU got you. So.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, graduate. I was excited to hear that. That's cool. I'm glad you guys are doing well. I see Rodrigo up in the meeting there as well.
Yeah,
So
hey Rodrigo.
good to see some Mason folks attending the conference.
The best of luck to you over at NU. It's a beautiful campus.
Yeah. Have a good one.
Take care, man.
Bye.
Nice speaking to you all.